I didn't know I was manic at the time. I thought the intensity in my head was clarity. I thought the constant buzz of thoughts racing through my mind was productivity. I thought I was just operating at a higher level than everyone else around me. But here's the thing. Fasting didn't make me better. It made me normal. I only understood that months later, when someone else pointed out what I couldn't see myself. When the fog finally cleared enough for me to look back and realize, I had been living in a state I just couldn't describe. This is the story of how removing food helped me find the clarity I didn't even know I was missing. This was during the pandemic era. Like a lot of people, I gained weight. Not a dangerous amount, but enough that I noticed. Enough that my clothes fit differently. Enough that when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My confidence had taken a hit. Social feedback was changing. Women who were flirtatious with me now seemed distant. Less interested. The energy in rooms felt different when I walked in. And then? There was this one specific moment that made it all feel real. Someone I'd been talking to casually made a comment. They said, I'd let myself go. That I wasn't as attractive as I used to be. It wasn't said with malice. Just honesty. And that shook me to the core. I realized I was stuck in this cycle. Wake up tired. Eat to feel better. Feel worse an hour later. Eat again to fix that. Crash. Repeat. Day after day after day. The current pattern wasn't working. I needed a hard reset. Something drastic enough to break the momentum I was trapped in. So I looked at fasting. Not as a diet. Not as punishment. But as a way to raise my stats across the board. Health, confidence, self-respect, dating prospects. A way to regain some sense of agency over my own body and mind. I didn't even know what I was actually resetting. But I knew something had to change. Before I started fasting, I had constant brain fog. Not the kind where you can't think. The opposite, actually. It was too many thoughts, all the time. Competing for attention. Layered on top of each other. And my energy swung wildly throughout the day. I'd wake up wired, crash by noon, spike again at 3 p.m., then feel completely drained by evening. My mood followed the same chaotic pattern. I felt overstimulated. Always on. Like my nervous system was running at 110%, all day, every day. Physically, I had all these signals I didn't know how to read. Jittery energy that just wouldn't settle. An awareness of my own heartbeat, constantly. Difficulty staying still, even when I wanted to rest. Eating gave me short-term relief. Like 10 to 15 minutes of calm. And then it would fade, and I'd feel worse than before. Not eating led to crashes. Hard ones. Where I couldn't think straight, couldn't regulate my emotions. Now I want to be clear. This wasn't extreme. I wasn't in danger. I was still functioning. Going to work, seeing friends, living my life. But it wasn't self-directed. I was being pushed around by these internal states I didn't understand and couldn't control. So I started fasting. Intermittent at first. 16 hours on, 8 hours off. Then longer windows. 24-hour fasts. Occasionally pushing to 48. And what happened was surprising. It didn't add anything. It removed excess. My energy started regulating. Instead of spiking and crashing, it stayed steady. Not high, not low. Just consistent. Reliable. My nervous system began to calm down. That jittery, always-on feeling started fading. I could sit still without feeling like I was going to crawl out of my skin. When I was hungry, my brain couldn't afford to spiral emotionally. It had to prioritize. Social anxieties that used to consume me for hours just didn't have space anymore. My priorities became clearer because I had less energy to waste on noise. I wasn't thinking less. I was thinking more deliberately. With direction. With intent. And the physical signals I'd been ignoring? They started making sense. I could tell the difference between actual hunger and emotional discomfort. Between needing rest and needing stimulation. And for the first time in, I don't even know how long, I felt like I was operating my own body instead of just riding along inside it. But then, things started happening that I didn't expect at all. My speech became clearer. More deliberate. I wasn't rushing through sentences or interrupting people or losing my train of thought halfway through. Words came out smoother, more grounded. I felt more embodied, more present in my own skin, less like I was watching myself from a distance and more like I was actually here. Honestly, that hit me, because I hadn't even noticed. All that excess energy had made my voice higher, more frantic, rushed, like I was always trying to get the words out before I lost the thought. But now, it was lower, steadier, and apparently, it exuded confidence. I had way more courage in conversations, not in a loud, performative way, but in a steady way. I could hold space. I could disagree without getting defensive. I could sit in silence without needing to fill it. Less reactive, more present. Now, I do need to emphasize something here. These are observations, not guarantees. This was my experience. Your experience might be different. Fasting isn't a cure-all, and I'm not saying it will do this for everyone. But for me, it was profound. Months later, I was talking with a friend who was studying psychology. I was describing how I'd been feeling before fasting. The intensity, the racing thoughts, the jittery energy, the mood swings, just casually, like it was normal. And then she stopped me. She said, "That sounds like a manic pattern." Retrospectively, it all made sense. The intensity I thought was clarity, that was excess. The constant mental buzz I thought was productivity, that was dysregulation. The jittery energy, overstimulation. And I'd been operating in a state that felt normal to me, but wasn't healthy, wasn't sustainable, wasn't even mine. The realization wasn't scary. It was clarifying. Like finally having a name for something I'd been living with for years. So, here's what I learned from all of this. Excess states don't need amplification. They need constraint. Modern life rewards stimulation. More productivity. More intensity. More output. More presence. More energy. Always more. But regulation? Regulation feels boring. It feels slow. It feels like you're not doing enough. Until you need it. Fasting was one form of imposed structure, but the principle applies everywhere. Work, emotions, ambition, identity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove instead of add, constrain instead of expand, create boundaries instead of breaking them. Not because you're weak, but because sustainable strength requires regulation. Real clarity comes from focus, not intensity. And you can't see that when you're in it. You know what surprised me the most about this whole experience? It wasn't the change itself. It was realizing how dysregulated I'd been and how completely unaware of it I was. I thought I had the tools. I thought I was in control. But having tools and being able to use them properly, those are two very different things. And I want to say this clearly, this is my personal experience. If you're struggling with mood regulation, racing thoughts, or anything that feels out of your control, please talk to a professional. Fasting helped me, but it's not a replacement for real support. Sometimes, you don't know you're lost until you find your way back. And sometimes, the quietest version of yourself is the strongest one you've ever been.